Very good evening. Thanks for joining us here on the Sunday edition of the Urban Debate. I'm Afrida Rahman Ali. On Mirror Now, we are tracking the voters' pulse ahead of the polling day tomorrow. It's going to be the second phase of polling for the high-stakes battle in Uttar Pradesh. 55 seats in Western UP up for grabs, with high-profile seats like Rampur, Budaun and Saharanpur at stake. Uttarakhand, it's going to be a single-phase polling, and the Hill state will also see a pitched battle between the Congress and the BJP. And of course, the tourism hub of Goa will also go to polls tomorrow. Again, a stiff poll battle between the BJP and the Congress, made even more challenging with the AAP and the TMC throwing in the gauntlet. So what we have for you here on Mirror Now are the citizens' voices. And of course, the experts will help us deconstruct the poll gamble. For an economy that's just about recovering from COVID-induced distress, people are clamoring for jobs and better health facilities. They are asking for respite from price rise. And they recount the COVID horror. This is what the urban voters have to say, as we will make you listen into some of those voices seeking accountability from those who they have voted to power in the past, and of course their expectations from the leaders who are in fray. First, let's listen into some of those voters' voices. My colleague Alok Singh was in Amroha earlier in Uttar Pradesh, and he spoke to some of the voters and their expectations. Let's listen.
We have just entered Amroha city, and here this is Mandi, which has now been relocated, shifted to another location because of the election work is going on. The polling agents are there, and they are doing the election work, and that is why this Mandi, which was located at the heart of the Amroha, it has been shifted to the exterior part of the city. Here are the people, and these are small-time businessmen, especially these are Mandi people. I will talk to them. सर, आप लोग जिस तरीके से आप लोग को हटाया गया वहाँ से, अभी आप पहली बात तो उसके बारे में बताएगा, क्यों हटाया गया?
ये तो जब भी इलेक्शन का चुनाव होता है, ये मंडी तो बंद होती है, बस वगैरह खड़ी होती है उधर।
क्या बताना चाहते हो, क्या बोलना चाहते हो?
साहब 4 बार विधायक रह चुके हैं हमारे महबूब अली जी। आज तक कोई विकास नहीं हुआ, सारी सड़कें टूटी हुई पड़ी हैं। और 2 बार कैबिनेट मंत्री भी रह चुके हैं। कम से कम इस सड़कों को इनका विकास होना चाहिए। विकास के नाम पे ही वोटिंग होती है, जो भी होती है।
आपको सबसे ज्यादा समस्या क्या लगती है? क्या चीज सबसे ज्यादा जरूरी है? आप लोग छोटे बिजनेसमैन है, छोटे ट्रेडर है।
हमारे लिए विकास जरूरी है। कोई फैक्ट्री वगैरह कोई लगनी चाहिए पड़ोस में,
रोजगार हो
जी। अच्छा, रोजगार के बारे में कहना चाहते हैं हम, और क्या कहेंगे?
जब से मैंने वो संभाला है, पहले तालाब था, लेकिन अब यहाँ मकान सब बन गए तालाब के अंदर।
ठीक है, अब पानी निकाल दिया गया है और अब मकान बन गया।
अब जो यहाँ का सारा पानी आता बरसात का हमारे खेतों में भरता है। 32 बीघे गोभी मेरी खराब हो चुकी है, जो आज की रेट गोभी बिक रही है। अच्छा, 30-32 रुपए किलो गोभी बिक रही है। 32 बीघे गोभी खराब हुई, इसका कौन देगा? अच्छा, इतनी बारिश में पड़ती है, वो पानी तालाब में जाता जी।
तो मतलब जो पानी है उसकी निकासी की प्रॉब्लम है,
और
उसके कारण जो है खेतों तक में
बारिश पड़ती है, सारा इलाका यहाँ तक पानी आया था। यहाँ तक इस नहर की वजह से यहाँ तक पानी आया था।
अब विकास की बात है, विकास होना चाहिए। सरकार कोई भी हो, विकास करे। यानी कि ये नहीं कि योगी जी की सरकार थी तो वो बुरी थी या गलत है, वो भी बहुत बढ़िया सरकार थी। लेकिन इसमें सिर्फ इस सरकार के अंदर हिंदू मुस्लिम का जो मुद्दा होता वो थोड़ा गलत है। बाकी सरकार के अंदर कोई कमी नहीं है।
सरकार चाहे किसी की भी आ जाइयो, मेहनत मजदूरी सबको करनी है। ऐसा कोई ना काम छोड़कर 1-2 लाख किसी को दिया आज तक किसी भी सरकार ने? बताओ किसने दिया? बीजेपी आ गई, समाजवादी पार्टी आ गई, कांग्रेस भी रह गई, बहुजन भी रह गई, किसी ने किसी को कुछ नहीं दिया। मजदूर को समाजवादी पार्टी आई है, सब काम हुए हैं। अब योगी जी आए, बहुत पैसा दे गए थे अमरोहा के लिए, कुछ नहीं हो पाया।
मैं कमा के खाने वाला हूँ, लॉकडाउन लग गया, कहाँ जाए वो कमाने? बच्चे भूखे मरे। सरकार ने राशन दिया, लेकिन राशन से पेट नहीं भरता ना, उन्हें सब चीज चाहिए, साबुन तेल तम्बाकू सब चाहिए, लेकिन राशन दिया। ये क्या राशन है? सरकार को ये देखना चाहिए कि गरीब कहाँ है। बड़े बिजनेस वाले ने तो लोग दिया, वहाँ से बैठा बेच रहा, ऑनलाइन बेच रहा, ऑनलाइन पैसा कमा रहा। मैं तो ऑनलाइन वाला नहीं हूँ, ये ऑनलाइन वाले नहीं है। किसान आज क्या दिन से परेशान है, 1 हफ्ते से किसान परेशान है।
All right, so you heard the people's voices. We will have experts and political analysts join us to tell us more about What is at stake for these three poll-bound states? We will have political analysts shortly on the show. But before that, let's listen in to some of those interesting statements that have come from the politicians. You heard the people on the ground. Now let's listen into the political narrative, and much of it, as we will realize, there's a huge disconnect, what the people are clamoring for and what the netas are pitching. Let's listen in.
5 सालों से हमारी यहाँ सरकार थी। ये सच भी है कि उस सरकार में कुछ खामियां थी। वो सरकार पंजाब से चलनी बंद हो गई, वो सरकार दिल्ली से चलने लगी, और दिल्ली में भी कांग्रेस पार्टी से नहीं, लेकिन भाजपा और भाजपा की सरकार द्वारा चल रही थी। वो जो छुपी हुई साठगांठ थी वो आज खुले में आ गई है, इसीलिए हमें वो सरकार बदलनी पड़ी।
जो पार्टी मिलके चुनाव नहीं लड़ सकती, और उसके पहले हमने 111 दिन भी देखे और उसके पहले के 4.5 साल देखे कि किस तरह से ये आपस में लड़ रहे हैं। कांग्रेस एक सर्कस बन गई है, और ऐसी पार्टी पंजाब को क्या भविष्य देगी जिसमें सारे एक दूसरे से लड़ रहे हैं? ये सरकार कैसे चलाएंगे जब ये पार्टी नहीं चल सकती?
Let me introduce Mr. Kapil Madan, political analyst joining us, and also Mr. Binay Singh, who is again an expert in the understanding of politics. Let me, in fact, first go across to you, Mr. Madan. You heard what Priyanka Gandhi had to say. Now, this is interesting. On the eve of the election day, there comes in this barb about how Captain Amrinder Singh was all along colluding with the BJP. Now, will this kind of a narrative help the party retain Punjab? You heard the voters' sentiment as well. Much of the people out there on ground are talking about jobs, are talking about livelihoods and how they are recovering from COVID. But it seems the netas have not got it really. What is troubling people on the ground? Mr. Madan.
So, Afrida ji, one thing is very, very clear. If you see the discourse followed by Captain Amrinder Singh, now he has joined the same party against whom he basically, was fielding, and who basically he was very vocal against the same party. We've seen during the farmers' protests, in fact, Amrinder Singh was very vocal, and in fact, he was with the farmers. Now, after the farmers' protests, we all know that there is a huge discontent against the BJP, against the incumbent government in Punjab. And the fact that he has joined the same party openly will definitely not inspire confidence with the people of Punjab. And on the other hand, I think Charanjit Singh Channi has come out as a people's man. We've seen, though it is a very, very short time to judge anyone's performance, but at the same time, it appears the fact that he has connect with people, he has that X factor to, bring the, party back on track and to, win the election.
Okay. How would you respond to that, Mr. Binay Singh? Do you think this is, it's about these equations, the dynamics, the defections? No one really seems to be focusing, at least insofar as what we have heard, as much into the issues of the people. Now, what, according to you, will really decide the fate of those who are standing in this election, in the state election, in these three poll-bound states?
Let us discuss state by state. So let us come to the Priyanka Gandhi statement, what he said about Amrinder Singh. I think it's a angur khatte hai type of a statement. And you think I just laugh at what she has said. And if you see Aam Aadmi Party, so Aam Aadmi Party, again, they are in news in Goa and in Punjab. So Aam Aadmi Party, one thing, what is very, one thing what you can say about Aam Aadmi Party, that it is a self-accredited certification agency. So it certifies itself as the champion of, justice, the champion of anti-corruption crusaders. And let us talk about one of the issues which is very prominent in the Punjab elections. That is the sacrilege issue. And to my surprise, the sacrilege issue, once there was a committee was formed and it was headed by Justice Jora Singh, And what was the come out of that commission? Nothing. Jora Singh joined Aam Aadmi Party, and the output of that commission was nothing. So again, despite all these efforts, sacrilege is again a big issue, which is going to affect the polling in Punjab. So I think Punjab, if you talk about Punjab, no party in Punjab is going to have a clear-cut majority. It is going to be a hung assembly. And again, BJP will have a visible presence. BJP will have a visible presence in Punjab. In Goa, if you talk about Goa, the TMC factor, it is a hawk's call. There is nothing called TMC in Goa, and there are only two parties, those who are in direct fight with BJP and Congress. In UP, the most important thing about UP, Afrida ji, what I think, that law and order has become the main agenda, the agenda at front. Despite BJP in its manifesto, they have tried to put the development issue on the forefront. But I think it is the first time in the history of the assembly elections that law and order, security factor, and especially among girls and women has become the core issue, the frontal issue. This is the first time in the history of the assembly elections in India. Law and order was an issue once. I think when Lalu Prasad Yadav lost in Bihar after his regime of 15 years. So his regime was also referred to as Jungle Raj. But again, law and order was not the frontal issue then. It was one of the issues. So many issues were there. Caste dynamics was there. But if you can say that law and order taking the center stage as an issue in politics or as an issue in assembly election, UP election is going to be the first time.
Mr. Madan, how far are you convinced that this is the new reality? Every election, in a way, even the last time around, to be honest, we were saying that people have emerged out of the caste dynamics and they are voting on the developmental plank. But yet, time and again, when there are forecasts, when there are pre-polls done, it always turns out that, there is a certain leaning towards voting for one's community, and that becomes the deciding factor. And therefore, even in the political narrative, you have statements like 80-20 being perpetuated.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. In fact, if you see the entire election campaign of the BJP is premised on this agenda only. In fact, I don't see people talking about development, talking about the initiatives of the government. In fact, as you very rightly pointed out, in fact, the Chief Minister himself, Mr. Yogi Adityanath ji, he in fact referred to 80-20. In fact, Keshav Prasad Maurya ji precisely referred to the fact that आप टोपी पहनते हैं जो लोग वो अपराध करते हैं. He's made statement like this. We all know what is happening in Karnataka just before the UP election. The hijab controversy started, and I think it is definitely an attempt to polarize the voters of Uttar Pradesh just before the election, because they know that if they talk about development the government has done poorly. In fact, in terms of health initiatives, UP appears to be at the bottom of the table as far as the report of Niti Aayog is concerned. In terms of education also, it is fourth from the bottom. And we all saw the example of these data during the COVID time, because at that time I think UP, what was happening in the UP was very, very terrible. And I think if people forget this caste dynamics and if they truly vote on the issue that matters to the people, I think BJP will have a tough time in UP.
Okay, you believe BJP will have a tough time. Mr. Binay Singh, do you agree that there is now a strong anti-incumbency because of the troubles that people went through during COVID, for instance, and people are still recovering? A lot of people we spoke to have this to say, that the COVID-induced distress have broken their backs. And therefore, the new leadership that will come in, they are going to see who is best equipped to help them overcome the COVID-induced distress. Mr. Singh.
During the COVID time, people were propagating that the government is failure, the central government is failure, the state governments are failures. So it was I was able to understand at that time, because yes, there was a situation of chaos, such a huge population you were catering, you were addressing. But again, if today, when the whole world, they have agreed that yes, India has managed the COVID thing very well, and especially Uttar Pradesh, they have managed the COVID thing very well. If you compare it to the proportion of the population and the management done during the COVID period, it was wonderful, I think. So I think there is nothing you can blame or about the COVID management. And one more thing, Afrida, I think the political pundits and the psephologists today are following the old format of analysis. This caste is this much, this caste is this much. I think the state elections, the assembly elections, especially in Uttar Pradesh, is going to make this analysis pattern, the old analysis pattern, that is going to falsify that. Because this election is based on development. It is not, the caste factor is not going to make, a much difference in this. And the most important point, I think, which we are missing in the election analysis, that none of the previous chief ministers of Uttar Pradesh, they dared to visit Noida. What was the reason? That there was a superstition, that there is a bhoot or pret. If you once visit Noida, you are not going to come back to power. So again, that superstition was countered by a yogi, a Hindu yogi, whom if the modern media, they propagate them as a symbol of superstition. This superstition was countered by a Hindu yogi, a leader of the Bharatiya Janata Party. I think this is a very, moderate statement in itself. That you are a yogi, you are a leader of Bharatiya Janata Party, and you are not superstitious. So the other leaders, they are avoiding, and you visited that place so many times.
Yes, of course. So many times. Yes, that Noida jinx, we understand. But the fact of the matter is, here we are trying to focus on issues that really matter to the people, on the issues of price rise, on the issues of infrastructure. The caste divisions and the divisive politics, of course, is still ruling the roost. We cannot deny it. But the fact of the matter is, when you talk to real people on the ground, they say this time and again, कि हमें कुछ हिंदू मुस्लिम से परवाह नहीं है, हमें चाहिए तो नौकरी, हमें चाहिए कि दाम जो प्राइस राइज के मार से जो हम जूझ रहे हैं वो उससे राहत मिले. We'll leave it at that for now, Mr. Madan and Mr. Binay Singh. Thank you for joining us. Let's now move on to another state, and the state of Uttarakhand, where it's going to be a single phase election. The stage is all set for polls tomorrow. Total of 70 seats are scheduled to go to polls. The 2017 assembly polls saw BJP sweeping the state with 56 out of the 70 seats, while Congress was reduced to 11 seats. Let me introduce, joining us here is Mr. Atul Sethi, who is the resident editor of Times of India. Very good evening. Thank you so much, Mr. Sethi, for joining us here. Before I come to you with my questions, I want to play out this special report from Khatima, the seat from where incumbent Chief Minister Pushkar Singh Dhami is up against State Congress Chief Bhuvan Chandra Kapri. Voters of Khatima have their agenda clear. Let's listen into what people have to say.
आपका नेता कैसा होना चाहिए? कैसा होना चाहिए नेता?
बिल्कुल एक निष्पक्ष होना चाहिए, बिना भेदभाव के, बिना जाति धर्म जनाब उसके किए हुए जो है हमारा नेता ऐसा होना चाहिए. बिजली सड़क हमारी समस्याओं को सुने.
अभी तक ऐसा हुआ है
ना? हुआ है.
अच्छा, अभी तक ऐसा हुआ है. और लोगों से जानकारी लेना चाहेंगे. यहाँ पे कुछ और लोग भी हैं. यहाँ मैं आपसे पूछूंगा, मैडम मैं आपसे पूछूंगा,
जी बताइए,
नेता कैसा होना चाहिए आपका?
हमारा नेता हमें वो चाहिए जो मतलब हम बेरोजगार हो गए हैं आज, हमें रोजगार चाहिए. महंगाई कहाँ जा रही है हमारी, वो महंगाई हमें कम करवानी है.
अच्छा, आपको कोई बीजेपी हो चाहे कांग्रेस हो, किसी से मतलब?
किसी से कोई मतलब नहीं है, हमें रोजगार चाहिए और महंगाई कम चाहिए.
ठीक है, तो आपसे मैं पूछूंगा, आपका नेता कैसा होना चाहिए?
कैसा मतलब सही होना चाहिए, मतलब काम कराए, जो काम कराइए, थोड़ा कोई भी हो, मतलब उससे मतलब नहीं, दोनों ठीक है, मतलब काम होना चाहिए बस. विकास जो महंगाई कितनी पहुंच गई बताइए.
Mr. Sethi, you would have a larger picture of, the issues at hand when it comes to a state like Dehradun. It has seen a bit of instability when it comes to leadership with change of chief ministers. But at the moment, on the eve of the day of polling, what exactly do you gauge as the primary issue that might be a deciding factor for the state?
Okay, so before I speak on the issues, because I understand that what you're trying to gauge is the sentiment on the ground and what people want vis-a-vis what political parties want, because there's a clear difference between what politicians want and what the people want. Because in fact, politicians have their own agenda. The Congress is trying to regain power in Uttarakhand. BJP wants to stay on in power. But in between, there are the aspirations of the people. Now, in a hill state like Uttarakhand, where, the very basic issues like accessibility to good health infrastructure, many of the hill villages don't have roads. So we keep on reporting stories where pregnant women have to be carried on a palki to the nearest roadhead before they can be taken to a hospital. So these are basic issues which unfortunately they're not there in the political discourse. There's a lot of mudslinging that keeps on happening between the various political parties, but somewhere these core issues get lost in the discourse.
Yes, the core issues get lost. But now coming to the issue of whether it's going to be a pitched battle between the Congress and the BJP, what do you see happening this time around? What are the main differentiators, when you look at the political landscape?
Right. So it's a three-cornered contest here in Uttarakhand. So Congress, BJP, and Aam Aadmi Party is also there in the poll battle this time around. So while the major, I would say, battle would be between the Congress and the BJP, because they have been there ever since the state was formed almost 20 years ago. So it's going to be a direct fight in most of the seats, but there are 70 seats here in Uttarakhand, and every seat has a mini battle going on, because the number of seats are less, and the number of voters per seat is also lesser compared to, say, a bigger state like UP. Yes. So obviously the victory or loss margins would be narrower. So it's going to be a close contest in most of these seats. With the Congress and BJP being sort of directly pitted against each other in majority of the seats. Aam Aadmi Party is a new entrant. They are trying to cash in on the third alternative. Mr. Kejriwal has been here a number of times, and he has propagated his Delhi model of governance, which might find takers. So you really can't say which way the polls will go, because being a small state, the number of seats are less, and every seat has local issues playing out, as well as with both the national parties bringing in their national leaders. There is going to be some amount of voting on the national pitch as well. So. Yes. That's how it stands as of now.
82.4 lakh is the size of the electorate. Like you said, it's a small state. The turnout in the last election was about 65.6%, total seats 70 in the state of Uttarakhand. Now, like you very interestingly pointed out, that AAP is the differentiator. That's one factor that can upset the game for BJP or the Congress, and of course upset their arithmetic calculations, which is why, is that why you're saying making a prediction, under the circumstances becomes extremely difficult, Mr. Sethi?
Yes. Another factor which I'd like to point out is that there have been a lot of defections this time. So, you have people from Congress going and joining BJP and vice versa. In fact, there are over 20 seats out of the 70 seats where, there has been a defection that has happened. And, what has happened due to this is that people who have been denied tickets because somebody from Congress joins BJP, so, somebody who's hopeful for a ticket there doesn't get a ticket, and so they, decide to contest as independents. So there are these rebel candidates as well who are going to play a deciding factor in, I would say, over 20 seats, because they are going to cut the votes of the parties from where they have defected. So that's also a sort of possible scenario which might play out.
Okay, Atul Sethi, Bureau Chief of Times of India in Dehradun, thank you so much for joining us with your valuable inputs.
Yeah, thank you.